Luke Skywalker's withdrawal to Ahch-To represents a marked deviation from his established behavioral patterns across the original trilogy. In Return of the Jedi, Luke consistently confronts conflict directly, demonstrated in his decision to surrender on Endor to face Vader and the Emperor. In contrast, the sequel trilogy depicts him responding to failure by isolating himself. This shift is not portrayed as compelled by external force, but as a voluntary retreat following the destruction of his training temple, indicating a personal choice rather than necessitated exile. The triggering event is shown in The Last Jedi during the Rashomon-style recounting of Ben Solo's fall. Luke's momentary ignition of his lightsaber reflects an impulsive reaction that contradicts his earlier methods of patience, such as his restraint when Vader provoked him aboard the second Death Star. After Ben retaliates and the temple burns, Luke experiences guilt, yet the film provides no textual evidence of an active pursuit or threat that forced him into hiding. Instead, his subsequent choice to abandon the galaxy operates as a response to internalized failure. Luke expresses to Rey that he came to Ahch-To to die and to end the Jedi Order. These stated motivations illustrate avoidance rather than constructive analysis. He attributes the failures of the Jedi Order to structural flaws, yet removes himself entirely rather than attempting reform. This differs significantly from his behaviour in earlier canon, where he consistently attempts repair, such as seeking to redeem Vader instead of abandoning the cause. Luke's decision stands in contrast to Leia's response to Ben's fall. Leia remains active in leadership roles within the Resistance, despite personal loss. The comparison underscores that Luke's withdrawal is not the only possible reaction available within the same context. His absence removes a major strategic and symbolic asset, weakening the Resistance's ability to counter the First Order. This absence is explicitly highlighted when characters reference the widespread search for him following the rise of the First Order. Luke's severing of his connection to the Force further demonstrates withdrawal as a chosen behavioural adaptation. Yoda's exile in Revenge of the Sith maintains active use of the Force for observation and preparation. Luke, however, intentionally suppresses his abilities, which eliminates both his influence and insight. This decision limits his situational awareness and prevents him from assisting Leia or monitoring galactic conditions. Rey's arrival on Ahch-To provides additional evidence. Luke refuses to train her, despite her demonstration of Force sensitivity. His refusal is not grounded in an assessment of her abilities, but in his personal disillusionment. This shift from teacher to obstructionist suggests a defensive response aimed at preventing engagement with past failures, rather than forming new solutions. Luke's burning of the Jedi tree and his statements about the Jedi's legacy illustrate a belief that the institution should end because of historical failures. Yet his argument lacks internal consistency with earlier actions in which he sought reform rather than destruction. His rejection of institutional responsibility indicates a desire to remove himself from future outcomes, aligning with avoidance behaviour rather than systemic critique. The galaxy's search for Luke, shown through the map fragments in The Force Awakens, demonstrates that he was not removed by force, but left voluntarily, without communicating intentions or contingencies. This unilateral withdrawal created operational gaps. Han Solo explicitly states that Luke walked away after the temple incident, which confirms the absence of an external agent compelling the choice. Luke's self-imposed isolation becomes more apparent when contrasted with Obi-Wan Kenobi's exile. Obi-Wan remains on Tatooine to protect Luke, and prepares for a future confrontation with the Empire. In contrast, Luke contributes neither protection nor preparation. He disengages entirely from galactic affairs, leaving Leia and the Resistance without support while the First Order expands uncontested. Rey's training period further reinforces this interpretation. Luke's statements position himself as a critic of Jedi ideology, yet exhibit no intention of replacing the system with a revised structure. His assertions regarding the failures of the Jedi emphasize past errors without proposing forward-looking alternatives. This absence of constructive intent shows withdrawal without purpose. Luke's refusal to participate continues until provoked by external intervention from Yoda. The scene demonstrates that Luke's ideological stance shifts only when confronted with direct correction, indicating that his earlier conclusions lacked stability. Yoda's comments on failure reveal that Luke had misinterpreted his role, but Luke's earlier inaction demonstrates that his retreat prevented him from applying this insight sooner. Luke's minimal involvement in the conflict until the final battle on Crate further illustrates the consequences of his exile. His choice to intervene via projection demonstrates that he retained the ability to contribute strategically. This indicates that his previous absence was not due to incapacity, but to voluntary non-participation. The Resistance's losses throughout the film underscore the tactical cost of Luke's disappearance. Without him, the group suffers significant setbacks, including the destruction of their base and multiple ships. The film never suggests that Luke was unaware of these losses, but shows that he chose not to intervene until the final stages. The behavioural evidence across The Last Jedi depicts Luke's exile as a self-selected response driven by fear, guilt, and avoidance of responsibility, rather than strategic foresight. His withdrawal allows the First Order to consolidate power, deprives the Resistance of a critical leader, and contradicts his previously established willingness to confront adversity. The characterization within the film frames his disappearance as a personal retreat rather than a necessity imposed by external conditions. His absence created a vacuum in Resistance leadership, which is highlighted in The Force Awakens through dialogue, indicating that key figures believed Luke's return could shift the balance of power. This expectation is reinforced by multiple characters discussing him as a potential turning point, establishing that his disappearance altered strategic plans. Luke's fear of repeating the failures of the old Jedi Order becomes evident during his discussions with Rey in The Last Jedi. He articulates concerns that the Jedi historically contributed to their downfall, referencing the fall of the Republic. However, his reasoning centers on eliminating the Jedi Order rather than restructuring it. His response indicates a categorical avoidance rather than a nuanced assessment of systemic reform, differentiating him from earlier leaders such as Yoda, who continued training Luke despite similar institutional flaws. In his conversation with Rey, Luke asserts that the Jedi should end. This claim lacks a practical framework for replacing the Jedi's stabilizing role within the galaxy. Instead of developing an alternative philosophy or training model, he adopts a disengaged stance. His decision to suspend responsibility mirrors avoidance behavior rather than active leadership, as he offers no constructive path forward for Force-sensitive individuals or political allies. Luke's disengagement is further emphasized by his lack of communication with Leia and Han following Ben Solo's fall. The film presents no evidence of coordinated planning or attempts at reconciliation. Leia's statements reveal that she remained hopeful that Luke would eventually return, indicating that his departure was unilateral and unexplained. The narrative frames his disappearance as a severing of relational ties that might have mitigated the rise of the First Order. Han's description of the temple incident reinforces Luke's pattern of avoidance. Han states that Luke walked away, underscoring that Luke's retreat was not forced by enemy action. Ben Solo's escape did not prevent Luke from staying in contact with allies or participating in the galaxy's defense. The scene demonstrates that Luke's decision was immediate and unmediated by external threats, aligning with a psychological retreat rather than strategic repositioning. Luke's interactions with Rey reveal a defensive posture grounded in self-preservation. He challenges Rey's assumptions not to refine her understanding, but to discourage her involvement with the Jedi. When she demonstrates Force abilities, Luke responds with reluctance, providing minimal guidance. His teaching moment on the cliff focuses on deconstructing the Jedi's historical failures rather than cultivating Rey's skills. This emphasis on critique over mentorship suggests that Luke's retreat is ideologically motivated by self-absolution, rather than by interest in future generations. Rey consistently challenges Luke's assertions, but Luke rejects her requests for assistance until later in the film. His refusal persists despite evidence that the First Order is tightening its control. This sustained resistance to re-engagement indicates that his exile is grounded in internal conflict rather than external pressure. The fact that he eventually reverses this stance during the Crate projection reinforces that his prior inactivity was not due to incapacity. Luke's projection to Crate demonstrates functional mastery of advanced Force techniques, indicating that his withdrawal did not arise from powerlessness. The ability to distract Kylo Ren and facilitate the Resistance's escape highlights that he retained substantial agency. This reveals a contradiction between his stated belief that the Jedi should end and his capacity to influence galactic events positively. His ultimate intervention suggests that earlier inaction was the result of voluntary disengagement. Yoda's appearance further clarifies Luke's flawed rationale. When Luke prepares to burn the Jedi tree, Yoda completes the act and critiques Luke's understanding of failure. The scene portrays Luke as misinterpreting the role of failure in Jedi philosophy. Yoda's rebuke indicates that Luke's ideological stance was founded on incomplete reasoning rather than on a coherent philosophical shift. Luke's earlier behaviours therefore reflect misapplication of Jedi principles rather than enlightened reinterpretation. Examining Luke's exile as a structural decision reveals its impact on the Resistance's operational capability. Leia's forces suffer numerous losses throughout The Last Jedi, including the destruction of the Dakar base and significant casualties during hyperspace tracking. Luke's absence deprives the Resistance of a morale anchor and a potential tactical asset. His decision to remain isolated until late in the conflict directly correlates with the diminished resources available to the Resistance. The narrative provides no textual evidence that Luke monitored the First Order's actions. His disconnection from the Force eliminates his ability to observe galactic developments. This further supports the interpretation that his exile constitutes a deliberate severing of responsibility, rather than a strategic retreat designed to gather information or preserve himself for future engagement. His choice removes both his physical presence and his metaphysical awareness. Luke's final dual projection on Crate reveals that he possessed the capability to influence Kylo Ren psychologically. Kylo's reaction indicates that Luke's presence still had strategic value. The scene demonstrates that Luke could have exerted meaningful pressure on the First Order or provided guidance to Ben Solo had he remained involved earlier. The effectiveness of this final act highlights the missed potential during his years of isolation. The consequences of Luke's exile extend beyond military impact into symbolic resonance. Luke's mythic status makes him a cultural figurehead. The E8 galaxy's search for him shows that populations associated hope and resistance with his presence. His disappearance therefore weakens morale and hinders recruitment. When Luke reappears symbolically on Crate, Resistance fighters respond with renewed determination, demonstrating the influence he could have wielded earlier. Luke's exile also prevents him from participating in Ben Solo's potential rehabilitation. Leia acknowledges that she believed Luke could reach him. Luke's refusal to engage eliminates a key relational channel. The film implies that Luke's absence allowed Snoke's influence to intensify. This outcome reinforces that Luke's isolation contributed indirectly to the First Order's strengthening. Overall textual evidence across The Last Jedi frames Luke's exile as a voluntary withdrawal, motivated by fear, guilt, and avoidance rather than necessity. His actions result in reduced resistance capability, limited mentorship for new Force users, and a missed opportunity to confront the rising authoritarian threat. His late-stage re-engagement demonstrates retained capacity, revealing that previous inactivity was a choice rather than an inevitability.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.